Commissioner, for joining us this morning. Thank you all for coming out. We have a lot of ground to cover. I'd like to start out talking about a few projects, key projects going on right now, turn to the question of funding, the perennial question, and if we have a little time at the end, a few other topics. Since we're here at 7 World Trade Center, and right over here is the 9A project, if you could fill us in where that is right now. I understand it was almost done, and then there were the terrorist attacks, and now you're almost done again.
Yes, this work? Yeah, there we go. Yes, we are almost done with the 9A project, and those of us that have been involved in transportation for a very long time know that New York State DOT's 9A project is what evolved from what didn't happen with Westway. And State DOT had divided the project into segments, and the last segment was Lower Manhattan, and it was well along when the attacks on September 11th occurred. And then, as you can see from this great vantage point, we are what I sometimes call in the Lower Manhattan world the dog, or the tail as opposed to the dog. We work very, very closely with the Port Authority and with New York City DOT, with the NYPD, with the MTA, because our surface road work is really the last piece to be completed. And we work, coordinate that with the Port Authority. Once the Vehicle Security Center is complete, we will finish our work on the roadway, and once everything is done here at all of the construction site. We also worked very closely with Battery Park City, because I think we often talk about the infrastructure and how it has affected the business community downtown, but we would all be remiss if we also didn't talk about how it affected people who live down here. And some of the amenities that we've worked with on Battery Park City, some of the parks that we constructed on Thames Street, et cetera, really have brought a good quality of life back to the residents of Lower Manhattan. So we're happy to be part of that team. We are looking forward to the PATH Transportation Center officially opening and completing our work, which will be, of course, the paving and the construction, but also a lot of the landscaping, which will show a very beautiful finish to Lower Manhattan.
And that could be this year?
It probably won't be this calendar year. It will probably be next calendar year. So again, we've had some stops and starts, but it's all been for the betterment of making sure that the total project of Lower Manhattan gets completed with the minimum amount of disruption and to the benefit of the residents down here.
And easily the biggest project that's being talked about right now is the Tappan Zee Bridge. Obviously that's primarily a thruway authority project, and you only have a peripheral role there. But there's another big bridge project also here in the city, the Kosciuszko Bridge, we'll call it the K Bridge, and that's a record-setting project for you. If you could fill us in where that's at and what to look forward to there.
Sure. The K Bridge that we call the Kosciuszko Bridge connects Brooklyn and Queens over Newtown Creek. It is DOT's largest single contract, and it is our largest single design build contract. We awarded that contract early summer to a consortium. I had an update yesterday. They've been on the job for 4 months, and we are very excited about the project. It will be DOT's first cable-stayed bridge. And I think what's important to talk about with that project is the background. When we started talking about replacing the Kosciuszko Bridge in 2002 or thereabouts, we used a lot of community involvement, and initially the community was not on the same page as we were when we talked about the different designs, and it was through community consensus. I know a lot of people think of state DOT as roads and bridges, but these roads and bridges are in communities, so it's very, very important to get the community input and work with them on a design that is both functional and also that also works well in the community. So this project will be much enhanced than what's there today. The grade of the Kosciuszko Bridge, anyone that has driven over it, it connects Queens into the Long Island Expressway. It will be brought down about 30 feet, so the grade will not be as steep. There will be wider lanes. There will be a breakdown lane, which a lot of the bridges that were built 60, 70 years ago did not have breakdown lanes. So if there's even a minor accident, that creates great disruption. It will have a shared use path for cyclists and pedestrians. We're building a park as part of the project on the Brooklyn side, and we're very, very excited. The price tag is $555 million. So you can go play those numbers. But again, it is our largest design-build contract, and we would not have been able to do the project right now. We were originally scheduled to do construction start in probably 2017. So having the design-build legislation and working that project through that process has really been very beneficial, and we will continue the stakeholder advisory committee throughout the process. I strongly believe that if you let the community know when there's going to be significant noise or construction disruption, even though you have it in the environmental documents, it's very, very important to keep that dialogue up during the project while it's in progress.
Sure. You mentioned design build, and I want to touch on that in a minute, but you also mentioned community involvement, and I think that's been a priority for you. Another project looking upstate is the Interstate 81 project in Syracuse. It's a long viaduct right through downtown Syracuse. Right now you're in that stage where you've just gotten some community involvement. What are the options there? Why can't you do just a tunnel through or keep this bridge in place?
The project that Jonathan is talking about is I-81 in Syracuse. I-81 goes all the way from Tennessee up to the Canadian border. It is a very important interstate, not only for New York, but also for the country, international commerce. The viaduct, the 1.5 mile section, which is right in the middle of downtown Syracuse, and my words, divides the city structurally, is at the end of its useful life. It was built in the 60s. It was built at a time when DOTs across the country came in and asked for community input and then built what they wanted. And I heard that directly from some of the members of the community who were around when the viaduct was first built in the 60s. So we kicked off the environmental process last September, just about this time, with the scoping process. Any of you that has been involved in NEPA, the first phase is the scoping, where you assess kind of a number of alternatives and what impact they could have on the community and get different feedback. That scoping session closed September 2nd. We held over 20 community meetings. We got over 1,200, we received over 1,200 comments. The alternatives that seemed to be lining up, we had about 17. And when I say 17, that includes variations of primary alternatives. Number one is replacing it with a viaduct. The second major alternative is bringing it down to grade as a boulevard. There were some tunnel options. When we get into discussions about tunnel options, they normally take twice as long as other construction. You never know what's under the surface. You can do as much drilling and research during the environmental process. But the city of Syracuse, that portion of it rests right on a salt mine. So if you dig too deep, you could encounter some real issues with the water table. So we have formed a very strong collaboration with the community, both with the county executive and the mayor. We at DOT are looking at this not just as a transportation project, but as a transportation and community project. The city of Syracuse just did a Vision 2040, so we are integrating their thoughts into it. We want to make sure that those issues, those land use issues, economic development and sustainability issues are all part of our decision-making process as we move it forward.
Sure, and one thing that struck me there is the contrast between when this was first built and the way you're doing it now. And they're building interstate highways all over the country. They just cut through cities, raised neighborhoods. Now it's all about community involvement. I'm wondering, though, is there a risk that you go too far, that you allow people, to bog down the process? You have all these environmental reviews. You could argue with the Tappan Zee Bridge that Governor Andrew Cuomo has not really said how much it's going to cost, how much the fares are going to go up, and maybe that's helped expedite that.
Well, I think a couple of things. When President Obama released his Environmental Acceleration Program in 2011, which is what we used to get the bridge, the Tappan Zee Bridge replacement through the process, I think set the stage for what we all need to do when we look at projects. Traditionally, what people in the transportation world do, both on the government side and on the consultant and construction side, is you look out and you say, okay, we need to do something with this asset in 2020, 2021. So instead of looking at all of the phases collectively, it's like, okay, first we'll do the planning and environmental phase, then we'll do the design, then we'll do the construction. And what we're all doing now is looking at what can we do creatively to compress the schedule, and that's not just transportation agencies, that's resource agencies, that's our environmental agencies, our Coast Guards, our Army Corps, to make sure that we address those issues up front and do it accelerated, compressed, on parallel tracks. It's not all consecutive anymore. We are doing things in parallel, and utilizing design build and different project delivery methods also help move that process along. So going back to the 50s, 60s, and 70s, sure, when the interstate was built, which is fabulous for this country, transportation funding was robust. The environmental regulations that we have today weren't in place. Community involvement wasn't in place. But I think there has been a real recognition that it's not just transportation. It's economic development, and it's communities, and demographics are changing. People are not moving out to the suburbs. They're moving back into the city centers. And I think that is changing how we look at our projects going forward.
And then to return to design build, that's a law that was passed, I think, for years people had wanted to pass it. It's a project delivery method where you have, I think, one contractor design and build it all at once, and that can improve efficiency. You can get things done quicker. You don't have two different entities fighting each other potentially. And I believe you would have evidence that this has been a success. The K Bridge is design build. So maybe talk a little bit about how that's helped your agency, as well as it's set to expire at the end of the year.
Sure.
And what are the risks there?
Sure. A couple of interesting notes. 41 states' transportation agencies across the country had the ability to deliver their projects using the design-build methodology before New York State DOT was granted that authority in December of 2011. And Governor Cuomo saw that it was a way to, A, accelerate work on infrastructure, which was very important, B, put people in the construction industry back to work sooner than they were projected. If you remember, 2011, we were coming out of the recession. It was finally named a recession. And the construction industry was hit very, very hard, both here in the city and upstate. So the rationale was, if you accelerate some of these projects that weren't going to go into construction until 2015, 16, 17, into 2012, 13, and 14, you would help mitigate that. So the state legislature, at the governor's suggestion, passed legislation in December of 2011 to authorize New York State DOT, the Thruway Authority, DEC, and Parks to utilize design-build legislation for their projects. The biggest one is, of course, the Tappan Zee. But New York State DOT, we have already awarded 9 projects ranging from $15 million up to the $555 million for the Kosciuszko Bridge. We have 9 more in process right now, and we have 4 others that we are looking at. And they are as varied as the Kosciuszko Bridge, an accelerated bridge program in upstate New York for $35 million, the Rochester Intermodal Station that we're doing jointly with Amtrak and CSX, but we're the lead on that project in the city of Rochester for about $30 million. So for us, it has helped us take a look at those projects that we can move forward in a way that allows for creativity from and innovation from both the contractors and the designers. That legislation is scheduled to sunset when the legislature passed it in 2011. They put a sunset provision December 2014. Last spring, the legislature was not successful in coming to an agreement on what the provisions of the legislation should be. We are very hopeful that it will be extended. I think in addition to bringing innovation and creativity to the projects and to the industry, it's held both the department and the industry more accountable. When you use best value, which is how you look at a design-build project, it's not just low bid. It's price plus schedule, innovative means and methods. And now what I'm hearing from the contractors is they are looking at how they put their bids in and put their proposals in a much more thoughtful way. So I think it has been a real benefit to the department, a real benefit for the state, and I think it would be a disgrace if it doesn't get passed.
And with the clock ticking on that, are you trying to get projects started while you can?
That's why we have 9 in the works and 4 that we are looking at right now. Yes.
Sure. I think one of the questions is requiring project labor agreements on these. That was part of the renewal legislation. I think it got held up in Albany. Upstate contractors are concerned about that. Do you have any opinion on the matter?
Well, what we do right now is a due diligence study, which most of our projects are funded by the federal government, Federal Highway Administration, and that's one of their requirements. And when we do that due diligence study, we talk to the contracting organizations, whether it's General Contractors Association or the AGC, the consulting organization, ACEC, and then the trades. And we come up with an assessment of what the potential savings are if a project labor agreement is included. And if it is a real benefit to the state, we include PLA, and if it is not, we don't. We have used both. There's a project labor agreement on the Kosciuszko Bridge. There is one on the Rochester Intermodal Station, upstate. There will be one on the I-390 project in Rochester, but there is not one on the I-190 project in Buffalo. So depending on what the due diligence shows us, I make a determination and move that forward.
And then another question about funding. Obviously, a lot of it comes from the federal government. You have not seen increases there. Do you see any chance for improvement on the horizon?
Well, I think our Secretary of USDOT, Anthony Fox, has been doing an incredible job right now going across the country and stressing the need for a robust 5-year program. You know, I like to remain optimistic. I've been optimistic before and been discouraged when the results come in. I think the timing of the extension that Congress did is not good. For those of you that aren't aware, the Transportation Trust Fund, which funds both state DOT and the MTA, both roads and bridges and transit, was set to expire this year and was set to run out of money around today. And Congress in August, before they left, passed an extender through May of 2015. And the reason May is not a good month is that's the start of the construction season. And for states like New York, we're big enough that we haven't slowed down our letting season. Smaller states like Delaware, Rhode Island, Connecticut, they have bigger issues when they don't know what their funding is. We're very disappointed that Congress has not enacted a reauthorization bill, and as important as the reauthorization part of transportation from the federal level is the money that goes behind it. A lot of good work has been done on performance-based asset management, as Dean was mentioning. A lot of the reauthorization language helped accelerate the environmental process, as I was talking about. But as my friend Congressman Paul Tonko said, to say that we can't afford it when we're the richest country in the world is really somewhat of a disgrace. So we will continue to push our delegation. We'll see where the cards are after Election Day, and we will continue to push because from my perspective and our partners in the industry, it's not just about transportation. It really is the lifeblood of our economy. And everybody says that, but they just can't seem to coalesce around a way to pay for it.
Sure. Now, the state is getting some money from all these bank settlements. There's a big windfall. I think I saw a $4.2 billion figure. A lot of that, $3.6 billion, came from a settlement with BNP Paribas. And there's been discussion about what are we going to use this money for. Some commentators have said we should use this for infrastructure. We should use this for transportation. Are you hoping to get a piece of that?
You know, I believe, I leave those types of decisions to the governor and to the legislature. What my role is and what the department's role is to make the case for funding. And what we are doing right now is pulling together our 5-year capital program. The MTA has a statutory requirement to do a 5-year capital plan and submit it tomorrow to the Capital Program Review Board for review. And that's been in place since after the New York City fiscal crisis. New York State DOT does not have the same statutory requirement. But when I became commissioner, I thought it made sense to start to look at how we did our capital planning in a similar fashion. So we are going through that process right now, and my obligation is to present what our needs are, to show what impact different funding scenarios will have on the state of our roads and bridges, and how we will continue to make those investments, and then be part of the discussion. You know, you mentioned, we talked about I-81 a little bit earlier, and we talked about the different alternatives. That will need to go into construction in 2018 or thereabouts, and each of the alternatives is in a $1 to $2 billion range. Our capital program right now is $1.6 billion. So I'm either going to spend one whole year's worth of my program on one project, or we're going to get additional funding and additional authority to do things such as public-private partnerships. So again, that's why my job is to make the case that the need is there, provide all the facts, and make sure that we're ready to move ahead. Going back to the design build and the Governor's New York Works program, we were given an additional $1.2 billion over 2 years, and there's a lot of discussion, do you have the in-house capacity to do it? Well, we almost doubled our program with the same amount of resources, and everybody at DOT stepped up to the plate, and we made sure it happened because we were excited about it and we wanted to move it forward.
And obviously DOT is not just roads and bridges. Rail is a big component of what you do. There's two things there I want to touch on. One is passenger rail. Early on, I think in 2009, President Obama gave a certain amount of money to the state for high-speed rail. You've also, I believe, started some studies to be ready in case there's any future funding. I mean, you could give us a brief overview on what's going on right now.
Sure. New York State DOT partners with Amtrak and also CSX and CP because the freight railroads own a lot of the right-of-way and own a lot of the assets that Amtrak rides on. So after, as part of ERA, as you mentioned, the president had significant funding for high-speed rail. New York State DOT received approximately $200 million for various improvements from Poughkeepsie to Albany, and then some improvements for Albany West. Those are underway for the most part. A fourth track up near Albany Rensselaer, a second track between Albany and Schenectady, some communications improvements from Poughkeepsie to Albany. The biggest project that the state received actually was for the MTA, which was the Herald Interlocking, approximately $350 million that state DOT partnered with the MTA on. Additionally, we just completed the draft environmental impact statement to look at a high-speed rail corridor improvements from New York City all the way to Niagara Falls. And the alternatives range from approximately $3 billion to approximately $15 billion. And again, the $15 billion price tag is because of the high volume of freight traffic between Albany and Niagara Falls for CSX. If you did a totally separated alignment and a totally separated operation, that's the $15 billion. And there's, we held hearings across the state in the spring, have received hundreds of comments on that as well, and are sifting through those, and then we want to be again positioned if there's more high-speed rail money from the federal government or public-private partnerships to move some of these initiatives forward.
But again, that's a big if, right?
That's a big if. That is a big if. That is a big if.
Sure. And you mentioned freight. When it comes to freight, a big question is crude oil. You have more and more crude oil traveling through the state, various safety concerns. In other parts of the country, you've had serious accidents. Mm-hmm. Governor Andrew Cuomo sent a letter to the White House earlier this year asking for more improved federal standards on this, but also the state plays a role. What is the state doing, and are we safe here in New York?
We are safe. I think it's very important to note that safety is the department's top priority, and you're right, Jonathan, when we talk safety, we think first and foremost of our roads and bridges, but New York State DOT, in partnership with the Federal Railway Administration, does do inspections of the freight rail network in New York. And so far this year, we've inspected more than 6,300 rail cars, including 4,200 the 111 crude oil cars and 2,200 miles of track. We have done that on a regular, ongoing basis, and we have also done it in very targeted hit squads at a couple of the yards across the state, in Buffalo, in Albany, and down here in Ulster County. We are safe. We have issued 9 hazardous materials violations, and we've uncovered 658 defects. We partner with the railroads. They are interested in keeping it safe also. The governor issued an executive order back in February where DOT, DEC, and the Department of Homeland Security, each of whom has their own unique role, all partnered on making sure that we are coordinated. I think one of the first things, one of the things to remember when it comes to the focus on crude oil is the local first responders. Because if there is an incident somewhere along the line or in one of the yards, yes, the railroads are there, but the first responders are generally local governments. And the state has been very active in increasing training with them, again, with Homeland Security at the lead, and working with the federal government.
And just one follow-up there. In May, Canadian Pacific, they waited 5 hours before reporting a derailment of 4 tank cars. There's not any, spill in that case, but is that a concern for you? Are these rail companies being quick enough to let people know when they have a problem?
Well, they are required to notify us within 1 hour. The commissioner has the authority to levy fines up to, for notice of violation, up to $5,000. We have issued 3 of them, 2 against CSX and 1 against CP for not failing to report. That was in the spring, and thankfully we haven't had to levy those fines again. I think sometimes all good intentions, sometimes it needs a little wake-up call. But again, we are very safe. We could be safer. The big issue is US DOT accelerating their regulations on the replacements of the 111 tank cars, and we are monitoring that very closely.
And just one more question. We'll go to, if we have time, a couple of questions from the audience. Talking about safety, here in New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio came in with this Vision Zero plan, trying to reduce traffic fatalities to 0. It hasn't got as much attention, but your agency has also worked on improving safety. You've taken a more comprehensive approach in some cases. Could you tell us briefly about that?
Yes. At DOT, traditionally what we did was look at intersections across the state without a cohesive plan of doing it. And I instituted a corridor safety initiative back in 2013, early 2013, so that we look at a corridor, a transportation corridor that falls in New York State DOT's network, and also in coordination with local governments. We've done 2 of them so far. The Hempstead Turnpike, 16 miles in Nassau County, where we instituted a number of initiatives and a number of improvements, whether it was raised medians, increased signal time crossing, et cetera. And then we just announced similar initiatives up in Albany on the Central Avenue corridor between Albany and Schenectady. And a big piece of safety, and Commissioner Trottenberg has made the same types of statements, is not just the engineering initiatives, but the education piece. And we very closely look at the data, and the majority of accidents, whether they're pedestrian, cyclists, are either driver inattention or pedestrian cyclist inattention, not crossing at the crosswalk, cyclists going through red lights, drug and alcohol, distracted driving. We look at those and work with not only enforcement and education, but the state health department has realized that this is a big public health issue. So we're very proud of what we're doing on our corridor studies. It has made a big improvement. One of the things that unfortunately in the safety area we count, when we count statistics, it's fatalities and accidents. We can't count what we've prevented. There's no way to ascertain that. So we'd like to see the numbers go down, but we can never say how many we have prevented. And I think that we know we have prevented, but we just don't know that number.
Sure. And if we have maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience. Right over here in the front. And if you could state your name and also keep it short, make sure it's a question.
Good morning, MJ Wilson. Thank you very much for the information you provided us. I had heard that there's an initiative called New York Works, and it was a group that was looking on how to improve infrastructure within the state. And I was wondering if that program is still moving forward. If you could give an update on that, please.
Sure. I mentioned the design bill legislation, which was December of 2011. Part of the 2012 budget was Governor Cuomo's New York Works program, which accelerated many projects into the near term that were in the out years. As I mentioned, DOT's program was $1.2 billion. Additionally, the New York Works Task Force was created, and what they did was they pulled together the first ever 10-year capital plan for the state of New York, which was DOT, SUNY, CUNY, Empire State Development. That was released last year at this time. And now they'll be part of the discussion when we look at funding initiatives going forward.
And we have one question, and then we'll end it right there in the back.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Lynham from the Citizens Budget Commission, and we've looked pretty extensively at the use of public-private partnerships. And one of the things we note is that one of the very sizable benefits of using that form is the operate and maintain phase. Now, we know in New York you need the extension of design build, but what are your plans to push forward into the next stages of the use of P3s and really capture those operating and maintenance benefits that can arise from those forms of project management?
As I mentioned, our first priority is to preserve what we have. So we need to stay focused on getting design build enacted and passed. When it comes to operate and maintain, I think there are different models. I think it depends on what the operate and maintain is. And I think the ability to look at all of those will be part of the legislative discussion after January.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.